Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and the game of Avowed. For those wondering why those games are paired together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So as is the purpose of this show, we aim to dive into those games to explore the world building and the writing and the narratives that are there to appreciate the world better, just geek out about the lore of this world, maybe use it for our own tabletop role-playing games, maybe help develop a role-playing character when we play these games, and just kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this stuff if you like what Obsidian has created there. If you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. I'm going to signpost you to episode 0, where I give further signposts on more of the foundational lore if you are new to this world and you want to learn some more of the basics. But today's episode will be a pretty good place to start. I am going to be going through the Maxims of the Pargrunen today. I was going to focus on playing Shatterscarp and then doing a big lore dump on that, but I have not gotten the time to really dive back into that area again to do it justice. So today I am going to go to what I was planning on doing a couple weeks from now, which is Maxims of the Pargrunen. This is a series of books that you can find throughout the game of Avowed. You don't just find them in one area. And they really talk about, I think, the society of the Pargrunen people, which are the people that you meet in one of the later zones within this game. And so there's no mainline spoilers per se. Like, I'm not going to be doing any huge reveals necessarily, but we are going to be talking about a society of people that you meet later and reading documents that you can find throughout the game. So depending on whether or not you might classify that as a spoiler will determine whether or not you want to continue listening to today's episode. That being said, as far as news goes for Avowed or Pillars of Eternity, not much to report. There was supposed to be a Avowed roadmap, like a support and content update roadmap this past week, but we did not get that. So I guess it's next week is when we're supposed to be getting that. It'll be interesting to see what support Avowed gets and what kind of things we can look forward to down the road before the Outer Worlds even comes out or even in tandem with that, which is something I'm also really looking forward to, another great Obsidian game, at least my opinion. And so yeah, it's a good year for those of you who like Obsidian RPGs. But with that said, we'll just dive straight into today's lore.
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So as I said, we're going to be reading the book series Maxims of the Pargrunen, books 1 through 6 today. And before we can dive into that, we should talk about what the Pargrunen even is. Now, if you want a deep dive on this group of people, you can listen to my episodes on the Pargrunen, Pargrunen, which I've done in the past. However, I did that episode before Avowed even came out, and so there's new information that we have here in Avowed to add to that. But as a quick little overview of the Pargrunen, reading off of pillarsofeternity.fandom.com, it says, the Pargrunen, which is of Lember for travelers, Lember is the language of the Pargrun, they are a distant culture of aptly, or mountain dwarves, renowned as great explorers, builders, and miners. They originate from Old Valia, which is an old civilization in this world that has now since then collapsed, and although they have a natural wanderlust that has led them to establish forces across Eora, they do have some in Rauatai, the Living Lands, and the White March. So yeah, the Pargrunen are a unique race or society of mountain dwarves, otherwise known as aptly. They have a natural wanderlust in the world of Eora. They go from place to place. They set up these settlements, but then they quickly abandon them to continue exploring the world. There are only a few locations within the world where they have kind of really settled down and created a long-lasting settlement, one of which we get to explore in the White March DLC for the first Pillars of Eternity game, and one that we get to look at here in Avowed within the Living Lands in one of the later zones called Gallowayne's Tusks. There is also reportedly another stronghold or settlement in the area of Rauatai. They have a very strong identity as the Pargrunen. Like, they very, very much have a way of living, and they very much look at their society as brothers and sisters compared to the people on the outside. So they're not quite xenophobic, although the ones in Avowed are a little bit more so. And they have a very strong culture about them. And so what we're going to be going through is these books that we find, or I guess notes, technically speaking, that we find throughout Avowed called the Maxims of the Pargrunen. And we find them in every area from Dawnshore, Emerald Stair, Shatterscarp, and Galawain's Tusks. So you have to go through the entirety of Avowed before you can really get all of them shown, before you can read all of them. And they describe different aspects of the culture of the Pargrunen dwarves that we find, especially in Solace Keep in Galawain's Tusks. So this isn't necessarily representative of every Pargrunen throughout the world, but more so the Pargrunen in this area of the world on the Living Lands. And so starting off with Maxims of the Pargrunen 1, it reads, "In older lands it was said, Pargrunen shall seek and strive, go out and wander. Now it is written in blood, dwarf shall dwell and listen. Keep Solace as your anchor. The taste of the blood is to challenge the living lands in haste is to die." And so in this first maxim here, we get the formula for how these are written. It starts off saying, "In older lands it was said," and then it goes on to talk about how Pargrunen normally are. So in this case, Pargrunen shall seek and strive, go out and wander. This is very normal for what we see the Pargrunen dwarves of the entire World of Eora doing. That, like I said, they have a natural affinity to wandering and exploring the world. So going out and wandering is something that Pargrunen just do. But then in the second section of this maxim, and it says, "Now it is written in blood," which you could take as they have learned a lesson through, people, losing blood. If you have something that's written in blood, typically it's because it was a hard lesson learned, or there was a great sacrifice to learn the lesson. At least that's how I'm kind of interpreting it. And it says, "Dwarf shall dwell and listen. Keep Solace as your anchor." And Solace is capitalized because that is the actual place they call home in Galawain's Tusks, Solace Keep. It is written in blood. Another way of understanding it is written in blood is also that you could also read it as written in stone, in the sense of like it's very binding. Like if you're writing a contract written in blood, it is written with the very like essence of you as a person. You know what I'm saying? So that's how important this is. This is now written in blood. That's how vital and core it is to our belief system. And the taste of the blood, that's how the last portion of each one of these maxims finish. The taste of the blood is to challenge the living lands in haste is to die. And I'm kind of taking that as like the actual application. The written in blood stuff, that's like the theory. It's the stuff that you write down on paper. But the taste of the blood is like what this actually looks like when the rubber hits the road. This is what it actually means that we have to do. And that is to challenge the living lands in haste is to die. So this is the new maxim for the Pargrunen dwarves in Galawain's Tusks here in the living lands, is that you don't challenge the living lands unless you want to die quickly. So don't challenge the living lands, because obviously you don't want to die. At least I would imagine you don't want to die. Or at the very least to know that if you are going to challenge the living lands, then you are inviting death quickly. And so this is the first maxim of the Pargrunen. And so we're going to follow this motif throughout all 6 of these maxims. It's going to start off, "In older lands it was said," which talk about how the Pargrunen normally act. It's going to say, "Now it is written in blood," so that's kind of like, pen to paper, what they now believe. And then the taste of blood is, this is what it looks like. I think a little more applicably, or at least it's like a statement to walk away with an understanding of what this new maxim is, or the new understanding that these Solace Pargrunen have, if I'm explaining that properly. Maxims of the Pargrunen 2, "In older lands it was said, to know the world, first make a map of it. To know the cavern, make a model of it. To know the soil, grow a garden of it. Now it is written in blood, you shall not mistake a model or a map for the maxim, which is the truth manifest in the world. You shall not reduce the great to the grubby miniature. You shall not mistake the drain hole for the maelstrom. The taste of blood is, that which seems clear on the map is tangled in the maxim." So this one I found a little interesting, also a bit confusing to navigate what exactly they're talking about here. So it says, "In older lands it was said, to know the world, first make a map of it. To know the cavern, make a model of it. To know the soil, grow a garden of it." And I think this is coming across with the idea of like, if you want to understand something big or you want to understand something at all, maybe reduce it to something smaller and understand that first and then move forward, which is kind of a logical way of doing things, right? You want to break big problems down to smaller problems to try to understand the little pieces of them and move forward with the information that you have. And there's some wisdom in that. But then it says here, now it is written in blood, you shall not mistake a model or a map for the Maxim, which is the truth manifest in the world. And then we understand what a maxim is, and the word maxim is capitalized, by the way. I looked up the meaning of the word maxim just in case, because I think I knew what it meant, but I wasn't 100% sure. It means a short, pithy statement expressing a general truth or rule of conduct. Example being the maxim that actions speak louder than words. So you have here, you shall not make a model or map for the Maxim, which is the truth manifest in the world. You shall not reduce the grate to the grubby miniatures. You shall not mistake the drain hole for the maelstrom. And I think what this is trying to get across is that you don't want to reduce the maxims that these Pargrunen are creating. And they describe a maxim, truth manifest within the world. And so this is like actual objective truth that you can see within the world around you. These are like the rules for living, whether you like them or not. And if you try to reduce any of these maxims to like just a smaller form, you in a sense remove what they actually are. Because, and I think this is kind of the purpose here for the comparison between a cavern and a model of it, or the world and a map of it, is the model or the map is not really the world, right? Like it's just a reduced little version of it. If you try to use that as reality, then that's not what reality is. The cavern, as it really is the cavern that's over there that you have to actually go into and explore if you want to go and see what it is. The world is not what's on the map. The world is out there that you have to go and explore. And so therefore, the maxim, these ways by which people are making these statements, these truth that is out in the world, is not just reduced down to these statements. These are truths manifest within the world. And so if you reduce them to some sort of, as they put it here, grubby miniature, then you are reducing the maxim and the truth that it represents. And so the taste of the blood, the application, the thing you're walking away with from this is that which seems clear on the map is tangled in the map maxim. If you have a statement that is reduced, like the reduced version of the maxim, that is like, oh, this statement totally makes sense, or like this ism that we have created here that we have written down totally explains away this part of the world. But then when you actually get out there and try to apply it, you're going to find that it gets tangled up because life is more complicated than that. This is really interesting because like I think this ties to what like I know as wisdom literature in a lot of senses, where like you're trying to write some form of wisdom and put it down on paper, and you read it and you nod your head and you go, oh yeah, that's so true. But then when you go out into the world, you find that there's actually a lot of situations where certain wisdom statements just aren't true, or they don't apply in certain situations. But you've like formed a lot of your identity or a lot of who you are, the decisions you make based off of some of this little statements or isms or proverbs or whatever you have. You're determining a lot of your choices based off of these reduced versions of what you think is true, and yet the world is more complicated than that. So it's an interesting little book to go through. I found it a little confusing to navigate just because of the metaphor of it, and I'm not nearly as insightful as I'd like to think I am, but I think I kind of got through that. Maxims of the Pargrunen 3. In older lands, it was said, think quickly and improve what you can. Constant testing is the lever of the Pargrun. So this first part here seems pretty straightforward. Think quickly and improve what you can. Constant testing is a lever of the Pargrun. So they seem to be praising this idea of like experimenting with stuff. They seem to be praising this idea of being able to think quickly on your feet, like being witty and clever and improving what you can, so making things better whenever you have the opportunity to. So this is what they previously would do. And that kind of makes sense with a group of people that would be nomadic or have a wanderlust, is that you would have to like do things on the move. You would have to improve what you can as you're going. And you would constantly test things to see what's true and what's not true, what works well, what doesn't work well. And I think there's some wisdom to this. And I personally speaking, I kind of like this. But now it is written in blood. You shall prefer the tried to the untried. You shall choose the tested over the untested. And this here, I think, speaks to a lot towards maybe some level of traditionalism, is kind of how I'm reading into it. But even on like a practical level of like doing the thing that you know works rather than the thing that you don't know if it works or not. And I think this lines up well with the first maxim about, like, if you're going to challenge the living lands, you're quickly going to go to death. So, like, if you're going to try to survive in this area, if you're going to try to live as a Pargrunen in this area, you need to go with what we know works, right? We're not here to goof around. We're not here to do X, Y, and Z. We're not here to experiment with these things. We are here to do a job. We're here to do a thing. We're here to survive. And so we're going to go with what we know works. There is a degree of logic to this. Obviously, it ignores the idea that, is there a better way to do things? You know, could we be more efficient in the things that we're doing? But I don't think that the Pargrunen necessarily would abandon that idea wholesale, you know, like we're never going to improve something. I think it's more about, like, we're going to do the things that we know work. And then if something ever occurs where we happen to learn there are a better way of doing things, and it doesn't, you know, violate any other maxims or ways of doing things, then we will introduce that idea. And I'm sure they did, right? Because, again, people are complicated. They're not just like these logic robots. But definitely it has this idea of traditionalism to it, of, like, we're going to do the thing that we know works. We're going to continue on doing things the way we know how to do them because we know it works. The taste of the blood is, the wit of one is nothing against the practice of thousands. The test of one life is as a pebble set against the avalanche of generations. And I think this kind of comes across as anti-individualistic in the sense that, like, one person wanting to be clever or one person wanting to find a new way of doing things does not stand against the tests of thousands of people before them. I think that there is a natural drive that any person can have to want to see if there's a better way to do a thing, not just because you can help improve the lives of people around you, but also because a lot of people out there just like that challenge. But that can come with a risk, especially on a societal level, when you have this one person, especially if they have a lot of influence, challenging norms and things that are set that work, that people know that they work. And then does that have a negative impact on society? Is it going to have other people pull away from these traditions? And when you're living in an area like Galawain's Tusks, where the survival of everyone is really depending on everyone cooperating and working together towards a common goal, this kind of makes sense, because if everyone's off doing their own thing, you know, one person dying it's always a tragedy, but it could sound like not a huge tragedy necessarily, but when you consider the hostile environment that Galawain's Tusks is, one person who has a lot of potential and a lot of capabilities can mean life or death for other people within that society. And those people, if they die, can also mean life and death for other people within the society. So it kind of has a set of practicality to it. Maxims of the Pargrunen, Part 4. In older lands it was said, tend to the mad as thy would be tended, for the mad do not know their madness. Cure the mad as they would be cured, for the mad may yet be saved. Now it is written in blood, suffer not the mad. Shut your ears to their speech. Shut your doors to their rest. Cast them out. The taste of blood is, madness brings the chaos without to the living within. All right, so this one seems to be talking about how they care for, they describe them as the mad here, but I think you could also put it in regards to maybe the downtrodden or the people on the fringes. It depends on how they are defining madness. You know, if it could be people who are literally insane, or if it could also include people who don't follow the maxims, who don't follow the way of living, because you could call them mad within a certain region. So it depends on how you are describing madness. And in this case, they're talking about in older lands. So, you know, the Pargrunen, the way we've always been, is tend to the mad, care for them, because they don't know that they're mad. We have to help people. There's a sense of altruism to that. There's a sense of, like, I don't know, this definitely seems more like left-wing-ish in the sense of, we're going to care for these people and get done. Not that right-wing doesn't. Point being that in older lands, they would care for their mad. Again, depending on what mad is defined as. For the mad may yet be saved. You know, this is the idea that they could still be saved. They could still be brought in from the place that they are. But now it is written in blood to not suffer the mad. Shut your ears to their speech, shut the doors to their rest, and cast them out. So there's definitely this idea now with the Pargrunen in Solace to not suffer the mad, which is to get rid of them. So if someone is starting to go into that area that people might call madness, whether it's true insanity or just fringe behavior, then you are to get rid of them. You know, don't listen to them. Shut your doors to their rest. Cast them out of your society, like exile them, kind of a thing. So I think again, there is some pragmatism to this in the sense of, like, we are trying to buckle down, do things the way that we know work to survive in this difficult area. And we are trying to also create a society that is going in a particular direction, doing a particular set of things. if you have people within the society that are literally insane and drawing resources away from people and you need to survive, that's, an important thing to consider. But then there's also this idea that, like, what if you have people that are dissenters? What if you have people that are going to be pulling the rest of individuals in the society towards different thinking that is not congruent with the way the Pargrunen are supposed to do things, right? If they're mad in that particular sense. So you would want to establish a maxim, a societal norm of, like, we don't listen to those people. We push them out. We exile them. We get rid of them. And so there is a pragmatic approach to that. I'm not a fan of it, mind you, but I understand why they would have written it down like that. The taste of the blood is madness brings the chaos without to the living within. And so there is kind of a xenophobia to that, where, like, these Pargrunen people, they segregate themselves from the world outside their society and outside of their keep, the Solace keep, outside of the walls within this giant castle that they live in. The outside there, that's where madness and chaos is, and inside here is where living and thriving is. And so if you allow people who are touched by this madness, let's say, to enter into our walls, it brings that outside chaos to the living within these walls that we have. So they are almost talking about it like a madness. And this can definitely be viewed as true with the Dream Scourge running rampant throughout the living lands, that people definitely seem to be going actually mad. And so these maxims could maybe have something to do with that. I don't really have a chronology on when these things were even written. Maxims of the Pargrunen 5, and this is probably one of my favorite ones out of all of them, because it gets into lore with the gods and all that. In older lands it was said, keep the faith of all gods, that you shall have a prayer for the day and the hour for your need. Pargrunen remember a time before these gods, may come there for a time after. Now it is written in blood, keep the faith of Abaddon, who builds, Woodica, who rules, and Maugren, who burns. Close your mind to all other faiths, save your faith in Nandru. And we'll talk about him in a second. The taste of the blood is, the lure of new faith may be indistinguishable from madness, and madness brings the chaos without to the living within. Pargrunen cannot survive these lands divided. So this one's interesting because it talks about how you approach faith within society. So in older lands, in the traditional older way that Pargrunen normally live, it says, keep the faith of all the gods, that you shall have a prayer for the day and the hour of your need. In other words, and maybe this is a little more pragmatic as well, is that, like, well, if you worship all the gods of Eora, and there is actual gods in Eora, then they're like an established fact of the world. If you keep all the faiths within our society, then if you need a favor from Hylia, you can get a favor from Hylia. If you need a favor from Skane, you can get a favor from Skane. If you keep the faith of all these gods, then we have all of them at our disposal, for lack of a better word. Now, that's looking at the gods in a utilitarian way, like we use them for their stuff or anything like that, but there's more than that, just one way to look at it. But the idea being that, like, if you have the faith of all the gods, then we have the good things about all these gods, and so let's keep the faith of all these gods within our society. Pargrunen remember a time before these gods, may come there for a time after. And so that's a really interesting statement, that in the old knowledge of the Pargrunen dwarves, which I imagine must be oral in nature, in the oldest knowledge of the Pargrunen dwarves, they apparently remember a time before these gods were even around or named, which is an interesting statement to make. Where do they get that information? What do they mean by that necessarily, right? And they're hoping for a time afterwards. But now it is written in blood to keep the faith in particular 3 gods, and they're not hoping for a time when these gods won't be around. You're hoping for the faith of Abaddon, Woodica, and Maugren. Abaddon is god of the forge and hard work. Woodica is the goddess of rulership, law, and justice, and vengeance. And Maugren is the goddess of fire, war, trials, and perseverance or persecution, something along those lines. And it says here, close your mind to all other faiths outside of those 3. Save your faith in Nandru, who is not a god within this world, but a significant figure in the Pargrunen society here in Solace. So it said, written in blood, this is the stuff that's written on paper, to keep the faith of Abaddon, who builds, right? So we're focusing on one of the gods of Eora, the one that you use to do work. So building the castle, building weapons, creating armor, making food, whatever it is that your trade is, we're going to be focusing on that and building yourself up, building the people around you up. So it makes sense that they would want to focus and worship Abaddon, who they can, in their worship, build literally build things in their society. Woodica, who rules, and this is going to be important for the society in establishing a firm hierarchy and establishing a firm government of who's in charge and who's not in charge, who rules, kind of a thing, right? So if you were trying to build a society that has those firm, definite things of who is in charge, who makes the decisions, who's the leaders, and who is subservient, Woodica is a god that you're going to want to have woven into your sociology, for lack of a better word. And Magrin, who burns, because life is difficult here in Galawain's Tusk, and following Magrin is also difficult. Also, knowing how to do war, knowing how to fight and engage in battle is probably important as well. These three gods are constantly tied together, and they are so here as well for the Pargrunen. The taste of the blood is that the lure of new faith may bring that will be indistinguishable from madness. And as we know, madness brings chaos without to the living within, so Pargrunen cannot survive these lands divided. And that last little part is a sneaky way of getting you to kind of like nod your head to it, because a person could read that and think, well, why not, worship Hylia? Like, is art really such a bad thing that we can't have artistic expression within our society? But like that last little bit of like, hey, we can't survive both physically and societally if we are not united. And that's something that I think anyone can agree with wherever they are, of like, oh yeah, we do need to be united as a people. Unity is an important thing. And so like that last statement kind of softens the harshness of the statement earlier on that says a lure of new faith may be indistinguishable from madness. So if you are even looking at other faiths, you could be viewed as someone who is mad. And we know what we do with mad people in this society. We cast them out. And the final maxim, Maxims of the Pargrunen 6. In older lands it was said, place the doing before the telling, place the act of work before the boast to history. Now it is written in blood, record all your efforts, be they triumph or tangent, for the record shall outlast the work, and the word shall be more precious than the act. The taste of blood is, the craft must not die with the craftsman. So I find this one interesting because it almost seems backwards or contradictory in some senses. In older lands, placing the doing before the telling. Place the act of work before the boast to history. So the Pargrunen, traditionally speaking, they normally would place like the glory and the focus on the act of doing things rather than the telling of doing things. Their society was all about what they were currently doing and not necessarily about writing it all down and passing it down from generation to generation. You're just focused on moving forward, the here and the now, and what we're going to do with what we have and exploring the world, etc. But now it is written in blood, record all of your efforts, be they triumph or tangent, for the record shall outlast the work, and the word shall be more precious than the act. And I think, in thinking about it, it does make sense with the society they're trying to build, because if you're trying to keep a society very static in how it does and thinks about things, then you want to write this stuff down, right? Because then you have a better chance of keeping them in that way. Whereas if you don't have these things written down, if you don't have these rules and these maxims, if you don't have this concrete, static way of doing things, if you just let people do things as they are doing them, then the society will change. It'll be dynamic. It'll shift and form into a new society over the course of generations. And so you do want to write these things down so that way you can point to the book and say, hey, see here in book 3, chapter blah, 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 subsection, whatever, statement 1, it says this thing was done and this was the result. So we know what works, we know what doesn't, it's written down, we can reference it, and now we can use these books or these previous writings as a way to measure what to do in the future, right? So that way you can keep the society the way you want them. And that's what they're trying to do with these maxims, right? And the taste of the blood is, the craft must not die with the craftsmen. And so that is to say that if there are things that, we have, that knowledge we have as the Pargrunen, we don't want that to die with the people. Because, again, remember previously we said that's anti-individualistic in a sense. It's more about the entire people group surviving and thriving rather than one person getting all the glory for trying something new. If you have mastered a craft that benefits society, then write it down so that we can have that. Like, it doesn't belong to you, right? Your craft, the thing that you did, isn't necessarily just yours. It belongs to everybody. So write it down as part of what we do. I think there can be some wisdom in that, although I do suspect that they're using it to control people rather than grow. And those are the 6 maxims of the Pargrunen. We see a very stark contrast between the Pargrunen of Solace Keep in Avowed compared to the Pargrunen that we get to view and interact with and read about in the White March DLC for Pillars of Eternity 1. Instead of exploring the world, they're kind of hunkering down, and instead of experimenting and testing and just living life in the present moment, they're very much focused on sitting down, staying where they are, doing things the way that they know work, and keeping society in that lane. And why are they doing this? Well, it all comes back to this person named Nandru, and I'm not going to go into depth on who Nandru is because, honestly, you could do an entire episode on him, and there's other tangible lore that comes with him. But Nandru was one of the founders, if not the founder, of this entire, fringe subculture of Pargrunen that we see here in Solace Keep. And he wanted them to, and this is kind of spoilery at this point in time, so if you, I'm going to put the warning here, if you do want to avoid this kind of revelation of who Nandru is and what he was all about, it is kind of tied to the mainline narrative, and this is later in the game. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a huge spoiler, but I think it's spoilery enough, particularly how it relates to Marius and his people. So if you're a little unsure on that, I would say maybe skip ahead a little bit or jump off today's episode. If you do, thanks for listening. Really happy to have you here. Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, and thanks for listening. But for those of us who want to continue on, we're going to continue on. Nandru's deal, the guy who started this entire culture here in Solace Keep, was he wanted the Pargrunen here to settle down and protect the gateway to the garden, to stop people from getting to the garden, if I'm remembering correctly on what he was supposed to do. Nandru, as you kind of quickly discover, appears like he was a godlike, much like your player character in Avowed as well, so he had some connection that the same connection you share within the game. And it's said that he discovered the garden and he wanted to stop people from getting to it because it was incredibly important. And as a worshiper of Woodica, he felt charged by Woodica to do so. And so he helped form and shape this entire society found in Solace with the express purpose of doing that. That's the whole purpose behind what he's doing here. And that's largely what it is that the Dwarves of the Pargrunen in Solace Keep are there to do. They are there to continue to hold steadfast and guard the entrance to the garden. Now, again, I do want to point out that a lot of this is coming off the dome and off my memory. I'm trying to replay the game and watch videos of this stuff, but there's so much of Avowed to comb through. I know they said the game was 30 hours, but man, I think I had 70 to 80 hours when my playthrough was done. So there's a lot of game to go through. But that's what I remember about Nandru. I'll want to do a deeper dive into Nandru and how he set up the society in another episode when I can get that much deeper into the game. But for now, that's what we'll talk about there. If anyone wants to add to this, though, if they remember sources or who says what and different things, please send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. Having all this information helps, especially so I don't have to comb through literally hours of video and screenshots to see what's going on. But yeah, that's everything to talk about on today's episode. So let's get to closing off the episode and podcast stuff, etc., etc.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
As chance would have it, I am joined by my son for the last portion. Yeah, so he's sitting here while I'm recording.
Hi, everybody.
There we go. But yeah, so that's thanks for everyone for listening to today's episode. It was really fun to dive into the Maxims and talk about it and process it as we were going through it. And I like this kind of thing. There's a few other series of in-game lore that I'd like to look at, such as the writings of Serena, but we'll do that on another time. As for today's episode, if you want to reach me, you can do so at worldofeora@gmail.com to send me questions, comments, criticisms, or just have a conversation. You can follow me on Twitter at World of Eora if you want to hear about updates on the show. If you would like to support the show, there's a few ways you can do that. One is you can go to ko-fi.com/worldofeora if you want to support the show financially. I don't expect anyone to do that, but it's there for anyone who just gets value out of supporting things that they listen to. Another way you can help support the show is if you're on iTunes or on Spotify, you can engage with the platform there by leaving a rating or a review or a comment. And that just helps the algorithm spread it to other people. So if you want to help the show, that's one way to do it. As for myself, what I've been playing is I'm still been playing Clair Obscure Expedition 33. I think, getting close to the end of Act 2, and that game has been fantastic. I have dumbed down the difficulty to story mode because I was having way too much of a challenge.
I want to do it.
Yeah, and it was too much of a challenge for me, and I'll just be honest, I didn't have the time to die and retry over and over again, but I'm loving this game. It is still my go-to for 2025, and I can't wait to see where the story's going, and yeah, I love the game. I have been incredibly frustrated by the gestural beach areas. If anyone's played the game, they're probably familiar with the awful platforming, and I would say awful in the sense of like it's very difficult. It's very getting over it with Bennett. So yeah, it's been an awesome game. I'm going to report on it more, but I have my son here and he is getting more and more impatient, so we're going to say goodbye. Thanks everyone for listening. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and thank you for joining me on this episode of the Pargrunen, talking more about the ones in Solace Keep and a bit about their Maxims. But that'll be all. Thanks everybody for listening, and I'm going to say goodbye now. You going to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
There we go. All right, thanks everyone. Goodbye. Have a nice day. This is my normal outro. I don't know what to do.